Hey folks, welcome back to Ken Michaels Radio. I'm having so much fun, as you know, interviewing people talking about the Beatles. And here on this channel, we can cover anything we want. The group years, solo years, their history, their music, their singles, what's going on in the news. It's all going to be covered here in one way or another on Ken Michaels Radio. Eoghan Lyng is back with us. We've had him on several times. He is a music journalist who has written for a number of publications, including Far Out Magazine, which I believe he stopped writing for, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
We Are Cult, Record Collector, News Sound, and Culture Sonar. He just recently released this brand new book, George Harrison in the 70s. We're actually not going to talk to about that book right now. I'm hoping to have him on probably in a week or at the most 2 weeks to discuss that book. But I thought we'd talk about two particular songs that I think have been criticized unfairly in Paul McCartney's solo catalog. And in fact, Eoghan wrote an article in Far Out Magazine about the first song that we're going to discuss. These are songs that, for one reason or another, the critics have been very unkind to. They've made fun of. They've been very critical of. First of all, let's just say hello to
Eoghan
Lyng.
Yeah.
How you doing?
Thank you. Yes, Eoghan Lyng. Yes. It's a strange. I'm cursed both ways because I have a Celtic Irish first name and a surname that no one knows where it came from. It's either Viking or it's Anglo-Protestant or it could be anything. But anytime I say Eoghan Lyng, everyone expects me to look Asiatic, and unfortunately, I just look Irish. There was a lecture when I was in university. I hope my friend Cormac doesn't mind me telling this story. He's biracial. He's mixed race. His mother is Chinese. And when my name was called out, the entire room just looked over at him, thinking he was Eoghan Lyng. That I feel it was mortifying, and I had to say, no, that's me.
But, well, this is new because I think I've always pronounced your last name Lynn. I didn't realize the G was.
No, it's like ding-a-ling. But no, if anyone makes any of those kind of jokes about me, I will get very cross. But just on the subject of Far Out, I was on the team for 6 months, and I've left the team. I might write for them again in the future, but I'm not actually a staff writer like I was for most of 2022. It's a fairly amicable split, but I had a discussion a month or two ago with the editor-in-chief, and both of us said that we felt it was better to part company. Huge respect on both sides, and I still read Far Out regularly. And the last piece I did for Far Out is an interview I did with Lol Cream of 10cc, and I think that's a very good way to walk away from. Yeah.
Leaving on top. You've actually interviewed all 4 members of 10cc now.
I have. It's my kind of my one trophy. It's the author of the book on 10cc, The Worst Band in the World, Liam Newton, emailed me to say congratulations. He said that is quite the accomplishment.
Yeah. Is that a difficult thing to achieve, to get all 4?
I suppose, especially with Eric and Lol. Eric Stewart is largely retired. I just got him just before he announced he was retiring in 2018. And Lol gives very, very few interviews. My mate Jason Barnard from Strange Bruce also highlighted that he said Lol is very, very difficult to get. So I suppose it is a trophy to have.
Well, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
The article you wrote in Far Out concerned We All Stand Together as a song. Before I get to that, just want to remind everybody, the few times you've been on the show, one of the reasons I love having Eoghan on is because he certainly has an independent mind, and he has a different opinion than other people. That's fine. I love hearing different opinions about this catalog. You know, I get kind of tired of hearing people repeat some of the same things over and over. We must look at this album as the Beatles' best album, or this album is John Lennon's best album. You had said that Walls and Bridges was John's best solo album. You also,
or certainly a second to Plastic Ono.
Yeah. Oh, it's a second to that.
Well, it's my favorite. I mean, it's a toss up between those two. I would depending on the day, I would say it's either Plastic Ono or Walls and Bridges, but it's definitely my favorite.
Okay. And
Yep.
you also said Extra Texture was your second favorite George Harrison.
George Harrison. Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So not everyone I know rates Extra Texture that highly.
I
Everyone's
know.
different, so that's
Yeah.
why I like having you on to explain why you feel the way you do.
I wrote a piece for Far Out on George's discography, and Cloud9 came last, and so many Facebook comments were like, "Stop reading at that point."
This is what I mean. He has an independent mind right there. A lot of
Yes,
people, that was his big comeback album, and how can you possibly knock it? But
yeah.
we'll talk about that the next time we have you on, because it'll all be about your new book. Again,
Okay.
George Harrison in the 70s. Plug, plug.
Rock and roll.
But for We All Stand Together, you put very high praise on this song. And you call it one of Paul's strongest works. And
Yes.
man, I tell you, I love the article you wrote so much that I copied and pasted all so much of the article that I wanted to read, because most of it is just, I love what you have to say here. But at the very end, you said something. I'm sure this is going to raise controversy here. You said, this was a composer of great invention, attack, and certainty. And We All Stand Together is as important an addition to the canon as anything he wrote in the Beatles or Wings.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love the song, and I really think it's a brilliant piece of music myself.
Yeah.
But I've never heard anybody rate it that highly. And it should be pointed out that We All Stand Together was a huge hit in the UK. Depending upon which chart you're looking at, it went as high as #2. So why do you feel that way about We All Stand Together?
Well, it's his first properly classical piece, isn't it? And that's he reinvented himself in the '90s as a classical composer, working with Sir Carl Davis.
Hmm.
And I really don't think he could have made that leap without the frog chorus, because it is so dependent on voices and strings, and it was written as sort of a choral piece. So it does show him, uh, jumping out of his comfort zone. There's nary a rock guitar in sight, and it is a very brave piece. And that way, I didn't say it was his best work. Like, it's not as good as his best work with the Beatles or Wings, but it is very important as his development as an artist. It is, if you have to say that if I wrote a piece, the 10 most important McCartney songs showing his development, I would put it in there.
Interesting. Like I said, I love the song. Now
Yeah.
you're giving it that kind of framework, and I could see why you're saying that. Although, when you're talking about classical works and McCartney, you always have to go back to the Beatles, because Yesterday and Eleanor Rigby had classical arrangements, as did She's Leaving Home. But this is a bit more intricate.
It's more intricate, and also it's also written for choral voices, sopranos, altos. Even if it is done in a comedy fashion, in a slightly vaudeville English fashion, it's designed to be sung by animated frogs. But at its heart, it is a classical piece, and I think it is very, very good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you suppose it's been ridiculed through the years?
Just because it was written for kids, and it's got Rupert the Bear, and it was at this time when Paul was, he was coming out, he was wearing a lot of sweaters and looking like an English schoolboy basically, and writing a song about teddy bears just wasn't very rock and roll. And at this time, it was the '80s when rock was where rock stars were expected to throw chairs out of hotel windows and smash things up. And it was at a time when people were writing these ludicrous things about Bowie of his cocaine addiction during the Station to Station era, and his comments on fascism were in fact part of him suppressing his inner soul, which is complete. I'll avoid the word. It was just it was a guy doing too much drugs and writing really great music. But it was that kind of bad boy image that Bowie had going for him. McCartney being, a nice family man, it wasn't easy to champion him at this time, I don't think.
It's kind of ironic. I think there's too much of an emphasis on image here for the rock star. And just take a look at what the Beatles achieved. One of the reasons why the Beatles were so popular is because their music they conquered so many musical genres. It wasn't just rockers and ballads. They did Indian music. They did heavy metal, if you want to consider Helter Skelter or Revolution heavy metal
I
or
do.
rock. They did blues. And as far as a children's song, what was Yellow Submarine? You know,
Exactly. But he was canny enough to give that to Ringo, as was John Lennon with Good Night. They were happy to write the children's songs, but they weren't happy to sing them.
hmm,
And it wasn't until the 70s that Paul started singing the children's ballads. I mean, is All Together Now a children's song? I don't consider that a children's song.
it could work as a children's song because it's presented in Yellow Submarine,
Maybe.
sort of that way,
So,
you
well,
know.
Hey Bulldog is presented in Yellow Submarine. That's not a children's song.
That's true.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of ironic. I mean, the thing that made the Beatles so great, one of the many things, was that musically they were all over the place. And
Yeah.
the public, for the most part, embraced that. So
Yeah.
why couldn't Paul just do the exact same thing on his own without, getting this kind of reaction from critics? And I wanted to question you on something here that you wrote. Maybe I'm misunderstanding this. You said the song was that little bit too English to gravitate towards America, but he was never considered as culturally embarrassing in that country as he was in Britain.
Well,
Paul was Paul was considered embarrassing in Britain.
in the 80s, yeah. I mean, a pal of mine is, as you can probably tell, even though I'm going grey, I'm a little too young to have been in the 80s, but to have seen the 80s myself. But Stephen Cockcroft from Nothing Is Real, who's from Belfast, says he grew up in the 80s. He says the idea was that Paul was this embarrassing uncle. Oh, another single from Paul. There was this feeling in Britain that and in Ireland of, oh God, him again.
Hmm.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you look at the charts, and like "Pipes of Peace" was a #1 single in the
Oh
UK.
yeah.
"Give My Regards to Broad Street" was a #1 album in
Mm.
the UK. Um, the world didn't take too kindly to Press to Play, unfortunately, and you know how much I love that album. But "Flowers in the Dirt" went to #1 so when you look at the charts in the
Yeah.
UK, he still did fairly well in the
He
80s.
was he did fairly well, but it was a case of people buying his records but not admitting that they had his records. Meanwhile, Spitting Image, which is are you familiar with Spitting Image? It
No.
was a puppet. It's a puppet sketch show, and that was popular in the UK. They had a series of scathing sketches about Paul McCartney. I mean, Phil Collins was one of the most successful artists in the 1980s, and no one admitted they had Phil Collins was mocked by stand-up comedians. He was mocked on TV. He was now
Yeah.
it's thankfully it's changing that the Phil Collins has retired. Now we're seeing a lot of people saying I loved the Face Value album or the No Jacket Required album or even like the stuff he did with Genesis. But in
Yeah.
the 80s, people didn't. They said, oh, he's not cool. He's not like Peter Gabriel, who embodies the aroma of alternative rock. Um, and I think even George was being hailed by the countercultures, which is weird because he delivers this really hackneyed and overblown album that is Cloud Nine, and it has that really awful sing-along single, "Mind on You." Oh God!
I don't get me riled up. Wait for the next show before we do
Yeah.
that. But that's really interesting. When you wrote that the song that it was too English to gravitate towards America, I thought that it probably couldn't have worked in part because we didn't know who Rupert the Bear was. You know?
Exactly. It's too the Touchstone influences are too English. It's too whimsical. It's too English tea, as he sings on the Chaos and Creation album. Uh,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, it's even more pastoral England than the England he presents on Penny Lane. It's I don't even think it gravitated in Europe. I think it was just like it's really a British Irish thing with Rupert the Bear. I don't think outside of Britain and Ireland people would have known who Rupert the Bear was.
Yeah. It's really a shame that, as you know, Paul loved the character. He grew up with it as a child.
Yeah,
And ever since I think it was 1970, he announced plans of making a full-length feature film,
yeah.
which we still haven't seen yet. We've seen the animated short, obviously, but I'm kind of hoping that, with something like Bruce McMouse, surfacing with the Red Rose Speedway box set that maybe we'll get the full length. Well, however it was finished, because I've never understood quite why the full length feature film never was released. Maybe it wasn't completely finished, but be nice to see, because there's that whole soundtrack album that Paul made for Rupert.
Yeah,
the But
I agree. Yeah,
I do think that when you take a look at all the work that was put into it, and give George Martin tons of credit, because he's so perfect for orchestration, and for arrangement, and and then went on to work with Paul on Tug of War and Pipes of Peace and Broad Street. But I think it's a brilliant piece of work, and I'm glad to see you giving it elevated status here.
yes.
Yeah, you wrote here, and you kind of just was explaining this, where the 60s was a time of opportunity and the 70s was a decade of truth. The 80s proved to be a more rational time for artists who were pivoting far from the extremes of the preceding decades to write songs of a more considered and sensible nature.
That's pretty good. That scans pretty well. I know I should be modest and say, oh my, no, that sounds pretty good.
McCartney was enjoying his rebirth as a father figure.
Yes.
He was clearly blown away by the reception that We All Stand Together, the video received. Okay. So the video was well received in England, and the single did extremely well, but his image,
Yeah.
He was attacked for that.
Yeah, I mean, there was a scathing piece in. I remember reading it 10 years ago in a newspaper where it has Paul reminiscing on his partnership with John Lennon. I would bring this, and John would bring this, and I would show him the cure to cancer, and he would show me the knowledge of astronomy, and it goes on in such a ludicrous manner.
Yeah.
And then I left and I wrote the frog song, and it's like it's a very mean joke. I mean, if you're gonna make that kind of joke, do it for something as hackneyed as Spies Like Us, which is a dreadful song, not something as beautiful as the Frog Chorus, which is a very technical and complex piece.
I love Spies Like Us, Owen.
I know. I know.
That's why you're saying all these things.
Oh no, I'm not saying it.
The bubble underneath there.
Tom Hunyadi also loves your Talk host. He also loves Spies Like Us.
Mm-hmm. Good. Hey,
yeah.
We all have different opinions, and you certainly hear that when you watch Talk More Talk on YouTube. But I kind of feel like what I said about the Beatles, that they were so widespread and so much variety in the music, and Paul took that even further as a solo artist. And sometimes when I hear people say words to the effect that this is the same guy that wrote Hey Jude or Let It Be, and he's writing We All Stand Together, why don't people understand this is for animation? This is for kids. And it's just like if Paul was writing music for a Disney film.
Yeah, exactly.
It would be something like this. You know, are you going to compare what Elton John wrote for The Lion King with the rest of his catalog? And
no, of course not. No.
If Paul had written the music to Mary Poppins, I would have said what a masterpiece that is. But think of him in a limited way as a rock star. But
no, he's not
doing certain things. But
he's much more than that. There was a great chasm of work that you may overlook if you're. I mean, one of George's great strengths as an artist was his skill as a film producer. I think that's where he really excelled in the 1980s. He could recognize a good script. He recognized when to step in, and when not to step in with a director. He was strong enough to trust Bruce Robinson, who directed this fantastic With Nell and I. Apparently the money people weren't sure about that script, and they thought that Richard Griffith's character should be a more overtly camp gay character, and the director said no, and George let him off, and George had told people to leave them alone, that this guy knows what he's doing, and that's why it's such a good film.
Yeah. Well, that's another side to George Harrison altogether, and he was very good at just picking scripts that were very good. Not thinking commercially so much how well it would do. He just cared about the quality of the films and the
Definitely.
story that was being told. But yeah,
Yeah.
all right. So We All Stand Together is one of those songs. We're calling this In Defense Of. And the second
Yes.
song, which is another one that Paul gets picked on a lot. There's a few others we can get to, but we're just going to narrow it down to these two. Is Mary Had a Little Lamb, which came out as a single in 1972, standalone single. And again, Paul gets attacked. I think, what is he doing writing songs for kids here and using the words of a nursery rhyme?
Yeah.
And you definitely want to defend that song.
Yes. I'll name check. Nothing is real. I heard an episode of theirs 2 or 3 years ago where Jason McCarthy, who's Stephen Cockcroft's co-host, made the point of, yeah, I used to think some of Paul's stuff was naff, but now I'm a dad and I'm listening to Mary Had a Little Lamb and I'm thinking, yeah, I get it. Paul's a dad and he's writing these songs for this target audience. And I myself had an experience a couple of years ago, just before the pandemic, when I was teaching in a small school in Bilbao, northern Spain, and I put this song on for the 5-year-olds I was teaching, and I thought, yeah, actually, that's the fact that Paul can write these great heavy metal rockers and also then write something for the 5-year-old. That is a gift very few people have.
Right. Well, he goes to opposite extremes.
Yeah.
And like I said about we could do this on several Beatle albums, but just take the White Album to go from Helter Skelter to Honey Pie in the same breath. Same man doing that, and Obla Di Obla Da and Martha My Dear and whatever.
I know it.
And he's carried that over into his solo career.
Yeah.
But in defending Mary Had a Little Lamb, where he took almost word for word the entire nursery rhyme, but he wrote a great melody to it.
Yeah.
How different is that than what he did with Golden Slumbers?
Yeah, I think Golden Slumbers is the better track. The singing like on the chorus is godlike. That's the only adjective I can use. And we're not getting that level of singing on Mary Had a Little Lamb. But what he does, what is very clever, is he does the Andrew Lloyd Webber trick where he goes onto this piano, he does the cadence, da 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 da, yeah, which of course Lloyd Webber did on Phantoms of the Opera and Pink Floyd used on Echoes.
Okay. Well, I kind of felt that Paul was doing something similar to that on Maybe I'm Amazed.
Oh yeah,
Those notes that are half steps, doing several of them all at once, either going up or going down. So I didn't really equate that with Andrew Lloyd Webber or Pink Floyd, but that's cool that you brought that up. Again,
Lol Cream also used it on a 10cc track called Lazy Ways.
Okay. What year was that?
That's on the How Dare You album, which is in 76.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got to wonder if influenced by Paul in that regard.
I asked Graham Goulman for a quote for McCartney's 80th birthday. He said, "No McCartney, no 10cc."
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty powerful.
Yeah. That's why he says, "No McCartney, no Beatles, no 10cc." It's as simple as that.
Mm-hmm. That's great. But again, we're also talking about image here, and there are some people who thought that part of the reason why he did Mary Had a Little Lamb was because he wanted to have a single that wouldn't be banned, like Give Ireland Back to the Irish was, the previous single, when in fact he already wrote Mary Had a Little Lamb before Give Ireland Back to the Irish. It just came out after that.
Exactly.
But, you talk about a melody that flows, which is Paul's possibly greatest gift. It's just, you hear the song once or twice, the song sticks in your head, and everything works with the words that are already kind of given to him from the nursery rhyme, how he turned that into that song. And, unfortunately, you hear a lot of the negative side. The press didn't like the song for the most part. Henry McCullough didn't like the song. What is he doing being in a band doing a song like that?
Yeah.
And even, despite the fact that I just mentioned it regarding We All Stand Together, was it Denny Lane or Denny Sywell here? who said the same thing about, yeah, Denny Lane. He said, I think what you got to look at is that it's like saying, why did the Beatles do Yellow Submarine? Because you can. Why not? I always thought that with Paul, it's all about the humor and the attitude in the band. And if he wants to do something like Mary Had a Little Lamb, that's up to him.
I think that's a very sensible view.
Yeah. I mean, I think the same way. You know, this is all part of who Paul is. It shouldn't shock anybody that he would do something like that.
Well, the thing that I love about Paul was, I think to a certain extent, John and George carried on the Beatles' work in their solo work. Paul just ripped up that map and said, if I've done it in the Beatles, I don't want to do it again. He was the one that really distanced himself from what the Beatles had done.
That's very debatable.
Okay.
I mean, you know, a lot of people will point to something like Ram now and say it's very Beatley. It's one of the closest Beatley albums. When you think about his vocals, the variety, the arrangements, the little bit of George Martin on the album, yeah, you can see that there are, I can understand why people would say that. You know, Uncle Albert, Admiral Halsey, you know, you think about the sound effects of Yellow Submarine, the song, you know, another ocean, body of water song kind of thing. Monkberry Moon Delight, you know, listen to his vocals there. It reminds you of Helter Skelter and Oh Darling, you know, what he was doing then. So a lot of stuff like that. Backseat of My Car can be, I can hear people think that, you know, it would have worked on side 2 of Abbey Road, you know, that kind of thing. I think so. Yeah. You know.
Maybe. I don't know. Maybe. I don't know.
I think
I'm
when you listen to the solo Beatles, there's going to be times when certain songs you will feel have a Beatlesque sound to it. It's just totally natural. It's going to happen here and there on specific songs. You can't get away from that. There are times when I think he deliberately tried to sound Beatley.
Yes.
And
I think in more recent years he's definitely, and I think that's why I have some grievances with Flaming Pie. I feel like there's some parts of it I feel are a little derivative. Like I find the version of Beautiful Night on the remake, as opposed to the version that we hear in the 80s, which was released on Return to Pepperland, although that hasn't been officially released. I just find it overblown and florid, and it's got that pointless Ringo vocal on it, and it's all, you know, trying to win into that Beatle nostalgia. Whereas on the original, it's just him and a piano singing from the bottom of his gut, and that, to me, it's much more powerful that way.
Yeah, actually, the original did come out. It was on one of the Ubu Jubu bonus tracks that was part of the Flaming Pie CD singles. But so you prefer when Paul tries to just be completely off on his own and try to be very, you know, not try to use a Beatles sound or a Beatles style?
Not necessarily. If it's organic, like on say Here Today or what, where then I think it's okay. But sometimes I just feel like he's doing it just as a way to gain momentum. I mean, McCartney 2 is the most atypical of his solo works as a solo. I mean, he released the Fireman and a few other works under a different moniker. But I mean, that has nothing to do with the Beatles whatsoever, and it's a phenomenal album, the McCartney 2 album. I love it.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how so many fans are pointing to that one now.
Yeah.
You know, there are many of us, myself included, even though there are certain songs I really gravitated to on that album. I actually love Bogey Music.
I love it. I love it too.
And Temporary Secretary and those songs.
Fantastic.
I was a bit baffled when it first came out.
Of course.
I shouldn't be surprised at anything that Paul does. You know, a track like Secret Friend going on for, what is it, 12 minutes, something like that. And Check My Machine and all that stuff. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. But no matter what, because of who he is, because instinctually there's going to be things that he will do in his music
For sure.
that will remind you of the Beatles. I think there are times when, like, However Absurd is a song where I think he really tried to sound very Beatley in that song.
I think that's one of the weaker tracks on press to play for me. I mean, it has some. I can't sing Footprints' praises enough. I was on the Two Legs podcast
Yeah.
2 years ago, and I said that's the Paul of Another Day, and For No One. I mean, that's standard of Paul. I said something similar to Eric Stewart when I interviewed him. I said that to me is the best song on the album by a long shot.
Okay, but you know, this is the brilliance of Paul. You know, there's so many different things. Even on McCartney 3, when it came out, some people said to me, you know, Seize the Day sounds kind of Beatle-y. You know, there's going to be certain songs here and there where it's just natural. He can't help it. He is who he is. And
Can't help myself.
all right. Anything else you want to say about Mary?
Mary Had a Little Lamb. It's got some good drumming from Denny Seiwell. Henry McCulloch doesn't seem to do anything, which might explain why he was so why he was so grumpy about it. But you got to sympathise with him. The first song he plays on is "Give Ireland Back to the Irish," and as an Ulster Protestant, that was going to get him into a lot of trouble back in Northern Ireland. And indeed, his own brother was beaten up in a pub in London, and he thinks, okay, how do we make up for this? And it's a children's song. And you know, I can see he's like, I left the show bands for this. Yeah.
Well, you know, it was just one song in the catalog, but I'm sure that it bothered him quite a lot to have to do that song.
He was definitely upset that some of the rockers were excluded from the Red Rose Speedway album. Like he's playing some great stuff on Night Out.
Yeah, but you know, I've said this many times, having interviewed Denny Seiwell several times. But Red Rose Speedway, when the album came out, he told me that the band chose the songs on there.
Really?
You know? And it wasn't so much what were the best songs, but what songs pegged well together and flowed well together. So yeah, it's a shame that Red Rose Speedway wasn't a double album. A lot of people are saying that now. I've always been so used to it as a single album and being aware of all the other songs that would have made the double album. But you know, that just goes to show that Wings was more than just Paul McCartney and 4 other members. You're getting involved with the songs that make the album. You're having more input.
I agree.
You know, also as musicians too. So
yeah, I mean, there's a case to be made that Wings. People say Wings were not a band, but it does sound like everyone from Lawrence Juber to Denny Seiwell say actually yes we were. I mean, Paul basically let us do what we wanted to do.
Yeah, a lot of fans can't understand that. They just think no matter what, Paul's the leader. You know, he had the final say on everything. Therefore, how much collaboration can there be? But there can be. You know,
I mean, Denny Lane is credited on half of the London Town album as a co-writer.
That's true. And Denny Lane also said, right when the Moody Blues were being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, that Wings wasn't really a band. So, you know, but Denny waffles a bit. You know, I've seen him say very complimentary things about Paul, and Paul was always encouraging him to write.
Yeah.
You know,
he said that to me too when I interviewed him.
What's that?
He said that to me as well when I interviewed him. He's made it very clear. Paul always that it was never a case of Paul saying no, you can't have any songs. Paul was always happy to have his songs, but Denny just wasn't as prolific a writer.
And just look at the Wings Over America tour. Denny sang 5 songs.
Yeah, well, I mean that's more than George sang with the Beatles on stage.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That is true. Well, once they became famous, and
can I just make?
He's had the last 20 years. The other members don't get to sing any songs live.
For sure. Can I just make? You mentioned "Give Ireland Back to the Irish." Can I just mention? So 2 years ago, I had the privilege, and I do say privilege, of interviewing Kevin Rowland, who's a huge. I don't know how famous Dexys Midnight Runners are in the US.
They had one big hit here with "Come On Eileen."
Okay, as I said in the piece I wrote, that was huge for the Irish diaspora. I mean, Kevin Rowland, although he grew up in England, he always maintained I'm Irish. I just grew up in England, and it was and he was a hugely important figure in the 1980s when the IRA was going on and the Troubles, and people were associating the Irish with balaclavas. That it was important to have someone who was effectively English saying, no, the Irish have a point. There's a war going on, and we've treated them really badly over the years.
Right.
And yeah, but I was a little cagey for some reason. During our conversation, he asked me, "So you like Wings? Could you tell me some of your favorite Wings tracks?" And I gave a list, and I said, and then I gingerly mentioned "Give Ireland Back to the Irish." I said, and he was like, "Oh yeah." I said it was good of him to release it. And he said, "To right of him to release it. I mean, yeah, it was really important." He said that back then, anyone who supported independent Ireland was IRA. But he said, "So good on Paul for doing that."
Good for, yeah. Glad to hear somebody like that support the song. Obviously, it wasn't alone, but yeah. You do.
I sent that quote to Adrian Sinclair, and he was like, "Wow, thank you."
You don't always think of Paul as being political, but every now and then he will come up with a song, like that one. Or
I wish he'd actually revive it in his set. It would be, but I suppose as Sir Paul McCartney, he can't.
I don't know. That's a whole other show, Paul's set list, and what we'd like for him to do. And there's a lot of songs I'd like to see him revive. A lot of songs he's never done live before, and who knows? He's 80 years old now. He's always going to be, as long as he's healthy, I think he's always going to be touring. So, but his set list is fairly safe with a lot of Beatles and a sprinkling of Wings classics and maybe something from his more recent stuff. Although he didn't play anything from McCartney 3 other than Women and Wives, and that was
really?
a few shows. Yeah,
that's a shame.
Yeah, he did Women and Wives, and then he substituted that for another song, and I wouldn't have picked that song anyway, especially in an arena, a new song like that,
It's my favorite song on that album.
Oh, I love it too. I think in a more intimate setting, it would have worked better.
Yeah.
You can get away with ballads and acoustic songs in an arena with 20 to 50,000 people if people know the song. Mm-hmm. But if the majority of people there haven't bought McCartney 3, they're not going to know Women and Wives. You can get away with Blackbird. You can even get away, he's been doing it for a long time now here today because it's a tribute to John, but most of the stuff that he does that are ballady, whether it's acoustic guitar or at the piano, they're all classics for the most part.
Yeah, for sure.
I was surprised he did Calico Skies for as long as he did, which is a great song.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it has an emotional resonance. I mean, it mightn't have been written for Linda, but she clearly embodied that track.
Okay.
I mean, there is that heartbreaking video of him singing it to her over the campfire as she's withering away. I don't normally well up to stuff, but that I actually had to stop to get a hanky.
Yeah, there are certain songs on Flaming Pie that I just immediately think of Linda, like Some Days, for example. That's a brilliant song. So is Calico Skies too, but.
Yeah, those two are the highlights for me. From there's other songs of that album that I don't think work. This is going to another controversial thing to say. I think that jam with Ringo, "Really Love You," is awful. I think it's wretched.
That is the only song on the album that I don't care for.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
There are people that like it when Paul is just. A song like that is very spontaneous. It just sounds like something that was just made up in the studio between the two of them. But there are fans that like that kind of thing. I mean, you like McCartney too, and one song that I have a problem with is "Nobody Knows." Nobody Knows. It sounds like he was right there in the studio and he made it up on the spot. Now, some people might like that,
I like it on that album because it is such a spontaneous, crazy album. I think it adds, but on another album, I'd say drop it. My biggest problem with Press to Play is he's trying to have it both ways. He's trying to have these great ballads, where he's also trying to have these crazy tracks like "Talk More Talk" or Pretty Little Head, and it gives it a slightly claustrophobic feel to it. He should have gone one way or the other.
And yet we're talking about Paul being all over the place musically, and we admire him for that.
I
And
know.
you could say the same thing about Back to the Egg. I mean, Back to
I,
the Egg, there's this new age or punk feel to it with Spin It On and Old Siamser and those songs. And then, then you got more of the typical stuff, the more ballady things that he would do, like Winter Rose, Love of
after the ball, after the ball.
That's more like an Oh Darling type of feel with that.
Down the hall.
So there are some people who felt like, why don't you just be more focused? If you want to make this a more punk album, Spin It On and Old Siamser, why not make the whole album like that? But it's not Paul.
I agree with that mindset. Paul's entirely. I think if Paul has a mild failing, it's that sometimes he doesn't have. Sometimes he's better off with a George Martin or a Nigel Godrich to say this is how the album should be, and to just trust them. And when he did albums like Tug of War, which I think is his best work, and Chaos and Creation, which is another fine album, they're just that bit stronger than the albums he's kind of thrown together, as much as they sound great.
Might I direct you, in case you didn't watch the show, we did one program on Talk More Talk, questioning, is Paul better with a producer or self-produced? And you get different answers, as you can imagine. So sometimes people, especially with the popularity of his early work pre-Band on the Run, how much those albums have risen in stature, especially when people are now starting to like Wildlife and Red Rose Speedway and the DIY albums. Because of that, a lot of people think, well, he's better when it's just his own sound, a pure McCartney sound, as opposed to letting an outside producer come in and influence the overall sound of his albums. And on the one hand, you can say, but how can you argue about George Martin, given his track record with Paul? And then while there are people who love Tug of War, Pipes of Peace was a letdown. In regards to Broad Street, to some people was a letdown. As far as the music, I'm not talking. Well, the movie too was criticized quite heavily. But when you become, and I wouldn't even call it immersed, but when the producer really is very influential in the overall sound of the album, then maybe some fans might think you're drifting away from your natural sound. So would you rather have Paul produce himself? Would you rather have David Kahn producing? Would you, every producer is different. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think I agree with Eric Stewart that Hugh Padgham's influences weighs a little too heavily on Press to Play. There's a lot of that stuff that just had become hackneyed by 1986. Everyone was using that kind of. Yeah.
I love that sound. I mean, I still love 80s music that has that sound. So I think it really worked on that album, and I could understand Eric Stewart's point of view.
Yeah.
Wanted a more simpler production. He didn't want it to be buried in Hugh Padgham's production. And that's only a few songs there. Not every song was Pretty Little Head and Talk More Talk. You had Footprints. You had Only Love Remains.
Yes.
Angry is more, straightforward rock and roll, very edgy, but doesn't have an 80s sound to me,
Well, when I interviewed Eric, he highlighted that track, that apparently they recorded a demo of it that was just him on guitar and Paul on bass and Paul screaming it out, and it sounds to me that it was like him doing a Plastic Ono thing or a Cold Turkey thing.
Right.
And then Eric spoke of his displeasure that it was re-recorded with Pete Townsend and Phil Collins, and it becomes more like a party than so he felt like the anger was lost in that kind of grit of, because it is Paul just coming in saying, I hate the Daily Mail, I'm angry. Which we don't actually often get to hear very often of Paul on that. Yeah. Another piece I wrote for Far Out was on Chaos and Creation. I gave it another highbrow title, Paul's most revealing and human album.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I do think it's his most confessional album. I think it really is, but it's his insight into his divorce or his marital breakdown.
Yeah, I might agree with that. Very dark album.
Oh god, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a darker album than the Dark Horse album.
And that's a perfect setup to end our interview here, because you'll be talking about George Harrison in our next interview very soon for your new book, George
Did
Harrison.
you enjoy the book?
I haven't read it yet. That's why I need some time. I'm reading your book. I'm reading a new book on Yoko Ono at the same time.
Oh, is that Madeline Bocaro's?
Yeah. I'm hoping to have her on this channel, and she's going to be on Things We Said Today very soon to talk about Yoko and her influence with John and the world. And yeah, I'm always reading.
Can you show the viewers my author photo just so they can see how handsome I am?
Okay. Can you do that?
No, can you lift up and just show the?
Oh.
Yeah.
All right. Right there.
Back when I was good looking. Yeah. Then COVID happened, and the grey hairs appeared, and the weight piled on.
Hey, you look fine.
Thank you.
I still think, you look natural with long hair. If you want to see Owen with long hair, go back to the earlier interviews on this channel.
Yeah, I mean, this time last year we did a program on extra texture, and I had like the Jesus hair down to here.
I think it worked for you.
I think so too. But I wanted to go back on the dating scene once everything opened up, and the consensus from women that I wanted to date with was shorter hair.
Okay. Well, then go with that, definitely.
Okay.
All right, Owen, thanks so much for being here. We'll talk to you very soon as I'm done with that book, the new George Harrison book. And thanks to all of you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. You'll get plenty more Owen coming your way. You'll get a fistful of Owen here on this. I don't know why I thought of saying that. But anyway, thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time. Take care.